Is the internet the reason you don't have any friends? I'm going to do the first part of this video, yes. If you're familiar with the Big Five personality test, ocean, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, it's the most useful big major personality test. It's the one that's been with us also, not the longest, but pretty long. And it's flawed for the same reasons that humans are malleable, right? But if you look at the most misleading personality trait, agreeableness, agreeableness just means you don't want to cause conflict. You let bygones be bygones. You let people agree to disagree. You go on with your day, and you're generally a low conflict person. Like when you disagree with someone or you find someone who's morally reprehensible or has the opposite values to you, you do everything in your power not to cause a scene and just go on with your merry day, right? Granted, some people are more agreeable than others for different reasons. So, for instance, someone who's very confident and strong and gives off the appearance that he could very easily hurt you, he's probably going to be less agreeable or he's going to be more confrontational just because he has the luxury of doing so. Now, why this relates to the internet is because if you grew up in an environment where if there was people around you who didn't share your hobbies, your values, your principles, or couldn't think like you or relate to the same intuitions as you historically you would have to find a way to communicate and deal with those people. But as of right now, not really. And like it or not, people talk about political echo chambers on the internet. Well, I would make the argument that a friend group a big reason why friend groups work is because they are echo chambers. Like it or not, politics is not downstream from culture, it's upstream from character, right? One of the best predicting factors for whether or not someone's going to be conservative is their levels of conscientiousness. So for instance, someone who writes down everything they're going to do in a day and does it to a T, they're way more likely to be conservative than, let's say, someone who's very high in neuroticism, but also relatively high in openness, right? That person who works as a manager at some store, that person who has multiple commitments, right? Or takes up multiple side businesses because he rather, use his free time to make more money doing a second job than just lounge away or relax. That person is vastly, I repeat, vastly more likely to be conservative, just going off the personality trait. And vice versa, if someone who's very kind of not utopian but high strung, ambitious and has a high reform desire, or he feels he has to change something about the world to make himself important, that those two people are probably they're gonna overlap in some ways. Both of them are be high-ish in openness, but conscientiousness kind of goes against openness in the sense that a big thing about conscientiousness is being cautious and being the opposite of a procrastinator. So like there is going to be some conflict just on that ground alone. But these two people, they're likely not going to be friends just because the personalities are somewhat at odds with each other, right? And you see this with friend groups, right? If you look at a person who's very, very agreeable, it wouldn't be surprising if everyone in his friend group never brought up religion or never brought up politics, or if they do have political opinions, they tell people they don't have any because they fear causing a scene. That being said, what happens to you if you can't deal with other people who are too different from you? I'm going to be frank, I can't deal with progressive zealots. I just can't. I grew up around them. I used to be in a friend group where at least two of the people in that friend group became very, very zealous people. And they're very... The worst thing about zealotry is just that's the only thing they can talk about partially, right? Or once you get them started, it feels like you can never pull them off. And they're just kind of boring because of that. But when I interact with them, I try my best not to bring anything up, try to be as non-confrontational, and it's just hard. I just can't do it anymore, right? It's just too difficult. I can associate with other people pretty easily. I can entertain people who are very high in openness. I memorize problems in analytic philosophy for them. I memorize various things from Joe Rogan's podcast. I never tell them it's from Joe Rogan sometimes, but I would just tell them, hey, what do you think about this weird paradox or paradigm? Or how would you explain this theoretical I'm talking about? Right? I can deal with people who are relatively different from me, right? But I think that's my problem, that I find people interesting in the sense that I find the range of, I find human cultures interesting and how different they can be from culture to culture, and that would have to also downstream into person by person to a certain extent. But so to that extent, yeah, the internet has made you a lonelier person, because back in the day, you could have had a friend who was very big into sports, didn't mind your video game hobby, and even was even a benefit to your life because he made sure you weren't too extreme in your inactivity, right, and kept you somewhat mobile. Or you would have had a friend that kept your mind open and constantly growing because he was relatively high in openness. Now now your tolerance to those people is just so much lower because you didn't grow up around them and you didn't artificially stimulate yourself with them. So when you try to go out in public, it's harder to talk to them because you never learned to growing up, right? And you're just too used to talking to people on the internet who are relatively similar to you. You go out of your way to find Discord servers that are themed with your hobby. You go out of ways to find, political groups that you agree with, or meme pages you like. You add people who comment things you would have commented if you thought of them sooner, right? You watch content creators you find funny. And I think humor, I think you can actually predict someone's politics with their humor partially. It would take me a while to explain this. I have to do a whole video on it. It would be less than 4 minutes long. I can guarantee that much. But yes, on with the video. So in that way, I think the internet has made us all permanently a bit lonelier because we're just not used to not being in echo chambers anymore. Like our threshold for dealing with people with a certain level of difference or uniqueness has just gone out the window. Now, in some ways, the internet has made us come together. I would make the argument that the internet has standardized things, in particular language, quite profoundly. I mean, meme formats themselves contain almost as like the media itself is more important than the message within the medium a lot of the time. People never, like, something being said on a radio or a television has a way different power to intoxicate crowds of people than something that's printed in an article, right, or in a newspaper or in a magazine, right, or something that's spread word of mouth or in a book. So, and a good example of this is pickup artistry or the manosphere, right? People call it, I forget what they call it. I think they call it, I know incels call it geomaxing. But for years, sexpats, expats looking for places to go do their naughty business would go to countries where being a Western man in particular was very exotic, right? And I shouldn't say a lot of these men were not the best intentioned. They weren't the best looking oftenly, but they offered something new to the locals there, especially since the internet wasn't as common. So if you're a guy from America, let's say you're white, you have brown hair, you're hazel-ish eyes, you're you're short for American standards, so 5'7", right? But you're tall in in a place like the Philippines. You could have went to the Philippines, went to a nightclub where the music's so loud you wouldn't have to communicate with anyone, and potentially have danced around, gotten laid, right? But there's a new phenomena just due to the fact that people, especially in South Korea, the Philippines, Japan, they have social media, right? So they know what Westerners look like. So a white guy in Tokyo 15 years ago was kind of exotic. People would have stopped and be like, oh, wow, that guy is, I've never seen someone with yellow hair before. I wonder if he will let me touch it, right? Or I could take a photo of him just so I could show my kids, like, yeah, I saw a white person. That doesn't happen. Like, because you could just go on the internet. Like, you can do that with any country. Turkmenistan. If you want to know what people from Turkmenistan look like, just Google it, right? If you want to know what people from North Korea look like, you could watch a documentary. If you want to know what a language sounds like, you can literally go on Spotify and type in that language's name, playlists, and listen to an hour's worth of music from all kinds of genres in that language. And it's like that filthy Frank quote. Thanks to the internet, ignorance is now an option, and people are still choosing ignorance, right? And that is a very powerful, profound quote. And the reason this is kind of standardized or homogenized things in a bad way is our expectations have also kind of jacked up in a very unhealthy way. There's this phenomenon called the hyperreal by the philosopher Jean Baudrillard. So the hyperreal is like the flashcards in your brain that you use to judge, reference points. Statistically speaking, people who are more unattractive, in particular for men, this matters more for men than women in regards to height. People who are shorter tend not to post as much on social media for numerous reasons. Number one, they don't get liked as much, so they never get the dopamine high and get addicted to using social media as common as other people. Number two, insecurities, right? It just doesn't work well for them. And people tend not to share that stuff around, right? People don't find, like, if you're a short guy, that no one finds you interesting because you're so short, unless you did something in spite of your shortness, like Muggsy Bogues, the 5'3" basketball player who I think scored an average of 8 assists per game, which is actually the higher end of his sport. He was competing against people who were 6'8", sometimes 7 feet tall, and he was consistently one of the best players. But if I never told you that, you would have never found Muggsy Bogues interesting. You would have just thought, oh, he's just another short guy. But if I was to show you a guy on Instagram who's, let's say, 6'8", or better yet, 7'3", you would constantly scroll down just to see how big he looks or how tall he looks compared to other people, other objects, doors, just the sheer magnitude. And like, wow, that is impressive. Like, just look how crazy this guy looks, right? So what this ends up doing is people in the real world, like what they see from the internet starts affecting what they do in interaction. So there was a very famous study that men who looked at videos of people doing shrugs, they tend to find the women around them less attractive. And this is why they tend to get impotence. I'm not going to say, I don't want to trigger that algorithm, but I hope you can figure out what I'm talking about more often. And they find the women around them less attractive, they have less powerful orgasms, and they find their girlfriends less stimulating. And this can be scaled up linearly. So the more shrugs they see, the worse this problem is. And this problem we see in the internet as of right now is definitely affecting normal people around my age range in most of the developed world to an extremely negatively unhealthy degree, right? They go outside, find people who are more, they think they're going to they don't think consciously, oh yeah, this person's going to be more like my Discord server than their parents were, right? But they're going to have a very different conception of common sense or what is standard, good, morally acceptable behavior than years ago, right? And this is especially a sad thing because I would argue one of the biggest problems with a lot of cultures is too many people focus on culture being what we do, when in reality a big thing about cultures is taboos, what we don't do. And the lack of people stating taboos or not letting their taboos they feel uncomfortable with being known is leading to a situation, especially for people on the autism spectrum, I would argue, to read the room, right? Like the ability to sense the culture, the spirit of a country or a spirit of a given location and guess what is not okay, what is okay, what you don't talk about is a lot harder than a long time ago. And this has made people vastly less socially aware, less socially skilled, socially intelligent, emotionally intelligent. And it's also made us more emotional as people because being alone is like playing a badly optimized video game with mandatory motion blur, right? Like you see everyone around you make connections or seemingly you think make connections, or you see older people do it a lot easier and you can't, like you're constantly thinking, well, okay, what the hell is wrong with me, right? So that's the way. So again, to recap the video, yes, the internet is why you're lonely. Now, can this be fixed? I don't know. Like, we are malleable as a species, but you definitely have to train yourself to undo a lot of these problems. I do it by not relying on media. I use statistics if possible. So I know in the United States, the average guy is 5'9.5". That could be by race. It's 5'6" for Hispanics, 5'6" for Asians, I believe. I think it's 5'11", 6 foot for Caucasians. It's 5'11" for African Americans. So again, or I could just constantly remind myself, average people are not that spectacular. They're pretty average, actually. Anyways, thank you.